Good morning and welcome to Booth Library in our continuation of A Futuristic Look Through Ancient Lenses, our journey to ancient Egypt as we progress through the month of October. I think this is our 6th or 7th event, and we have had all types of programs come forth, but this one impresses me as something that goes right to the root of life, and that's the people and perhaps the common people, because several of our other attempts have been looking at perhaps the very wealthy or looking at the geographic implications of life, etc. And now we're really going to look at the family and some things that would be quite meaningful for us today. We thank you for coming and hope that you will return. Make sure that you have a brochure from the back so you'll know when our other activities are sponsored. Even today, this evening at 7 p.m., we will look at medicine. And so without further ado, I give you Wafiq Wabi, who is coordinating this series.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation as part of the Symposium, EIU Symposium, A Futuristic Look Through Ancient Lenses. And as we pride ourselves in our achievements in the 21st century, we felt it's good for us as a generation to take a few minutes or seconds or moments to look back and see what great people did in the past. Today we have a very special presentation that talks about family, mother, sister, women, and children, the building blocks of any society. And when we look into the great achievements of this civilization, that I give my students exercise to make construction bid for this today with our technology today to make a replica of this. They did it from scratch. I tell my students, see how much would it cost today's prices with today's technology to build something like this. It's amazing. And wherever you look, you see this civilization that was the superpower of its time. Family was the building block, I think. We have family consumer sciences at Eastern Illinois. We pride ourselves in this, and we thank the family consumer sciences faculty and chair. I'll ask him to come and present them. We have School of Technology. The dean couldn't make it, and the chair couldn't make it, so I'll introduce technology here, part, and then ask Dr. Jim Painter to introduce Kaninika Bhatnagar, right? She is very strong in architectural technology and construction, but she is also strong in women. She has lots of studies in women in technology, and I'll not steal her thunder, but I'll leave her to do this. But before that, I'll ask Chair Jim Painter.
Thanks, Wafi. Thank you very much. It's a privilege for us to be here as Family Consumer Sciences, because really the issues that we talk about of today are really family issues at the base of about any of them we talk about, whether they're cultural things, nutrition problems we have. They come back to the family as the base. And so I'd like to introduce Christina Yousaf. And Christina is going to talk about marriage, family life. And it's interesting to watch Christina in the classroom because she comes in and talks about her arranged marriage. And the students' eyes pop open as she discusses how she came into her marriage. And so that's kind of exciting. And she'll probably share some of that with you. And then thanks to Dr. Mickey Meadows and Dr. Francis Murphy, who run our Child Development Lab. And so they, again, have a great perspective looking at families and children. They're going to talk a little bit more about family life in general. So with that, Wafiq, are we ready to begin? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Kaninika, School of Technology, and I'm going to be really introducing this entire piece because I'm going to be talking about gender roles in general at a broad level. Now, to begin with, I found this quote, and I found several confirmations of validations of this quote which is basically saying that uh, ancient people of the Nile Valley or the Egyptians have given women so high a legal status as they have given the maximum or the highest legal status to women in general. And that actually includes today as well, and that's what's so interesting, as we will see in a bit. Now, I apologize for a lot of text on my slides, but I'll try to sort of run through them. Um, Ancient Egyptian women were in marked contrast to other cultures, the kind of rights they had as opposed to cultures of existing at the same time, the extant cultures. There was a very high level of respect for women, remarkably modern, sophisticated legal and financial rights. Christina is going to be talking more about that. Particularly in the royal household, women could become extremely influential. They could rule. Women in ancient Egypt could be the rulers. And that is something that I learned while I was researching for this piece. For example, and you have to forgive me, I'm not getting the names right here. Ehotep, is that? Ehotep ruled while her son came of age. And then, of course, there's the female pharaoh, Hatshepsut.
Yes, very good.
Hatshepsut, and she ruled for 20 years. That was unusual, and that was something that I did not know. This is a carving. Let me just go back here. Of Nefertiti. She's driving her own chariot, and let's see here, accompanying her husband, Pharaoh Akhenaten, from the royal palace to the temple. And because she has an extremely high status, she is by herself riding in her own chariot. So she's actually the person in charge in that sense. Now, before we go any further talking about gender in ancient Egypt, we have to kind of sort of roll back to the idea of religion and gods and goddesses, because everything really kind of derives from there. So Egyptian deities tended to mirror their mortal worshippers. So it's kind of the other way around. The worshippers are mirroring the deities, the gods. So therefore, we can think about goddesses. When we talk about gender, we think about goddesses, queens, and the wealthy women, and then the ordinary women, the Egyptian ordinary women. These, by the way, are names of some goddesses: Isis, Hathor, Nut, Sekhmet, Tefmet.
Very good.
Thank you. So, natural forces have been personified as goddesses. They're goddesses for music, dancing, pleasure, and they're goddesses for motherhood, in particular fertility, motherhood, childbearing, etc. Okay? And goddesses had a very special place because they were the protector of the gods. They were also the protector of the pharaohs, and therefore that actually led to a very high place. So very quickly, let's talk about some of the goddesses in ancient Egypt. I should pretty much. The social system reflects Egyptian mythology, where goddesses played an equal, if not chief role, guiding the pharaoh, for example. Primeval mother figures in the earliest prehistoric Egyptian myths are female. Female deities were kept separate from the males. Egyptian goddesses are also creator deities and the protectors of pharaohs in the form of natural animals, for example, cobra, vulture, or lioness, etc. The first goddess is Isis that I'd like to talk about. Uh, she was important. She was very important because she was the goddess of motherhood and fertility. And therefore, she was worshipped throughout um, until the 6th century. Here, if we go, this is a statuette of Isis, and she's the goddess of fertility, pregnancy, provide protection during pregnancy and childbirth. That's, in this case, she's nursing her son, Horus. Uh, this is another very interesting goddess, Tawaret. Is that right? Yes. Tawaret. She is the goddess, again, of pregnancy, birth, etc. And she has a very, what should you say, grotesque kind of figure, but she was worshipped for protection against the dangers of birth, pregnancy, etc., etc. So this is a kind of an exception to other the ways goddesses have been displayed. And then this is another very, very important goddess. She's Maat. Maat. Yes. And she is, well, she's a symbol of cosmic harmony and balance. And what's important about her is she actually was sort of over the pharaoh in, what do you call it, in terms of her powers. The pharaoh was supposed to be following her dictates for carrying out his rulerships, etc. So Maat becomes an extremely important goddess here, and there are several depictions of her that we come through. So these are some examples of the kind of Egyptian goddesses, and from there we sort of get to the next level, which is the royal women, the queens, the wealthy women. Now the wealthy women, this is, by the way, Cleopatra. It's supposed to be her sarcophagus. Pharaohs were polygamous, but they had a principal queen whose children would be the heirs, and therefore that queen became an essential part of her husband's reign. She supported her husband in a variety of duties, religious and political, and these are some examples. Queen Tai was the wife of Amenhotep III, was actually born a commoner, so it was not unusual for that to happen. Queen Nefertiti, of course, you've all heard of her, full participant in religious ceremonies honoring Aten, the sun god. Yeah. Okay. Another surprising fact that I did not know: royal women undertook military campaigns, so they were not just sitting at home taking care of the children. They actually took part in conflicts, active conflicts, and they have been depicted as such. Regarded sufficiently threatening to be listed as enemies of the state, female graves containing weapons are found throughout the history of Egypt. That was interesting. These are some examples of rulers. Like I mentioned earlier, Ahotep ruled while her son was growing up. Hatshepsut became the pharaoh because of her father. So the legitimacy was actually gained through her father. They were given estates, financial independence, commissioned their own monuments, even developed their own religious symbols. Queen was perceived as being close to being a god. So if you look at their hierarchy, you have the gods and goddesses, and then you have the royal folk, and queen was very close up there. Amenhotep III and Ramesses the Great each built temples to their principal queens. In other words, their queens were actually being worshipped as gods. So that shows the amount of respect and stature that queens had in that society. Um, Nefertiti is shown actively involved in her husband's restructuring politics as well. So these are just some examples: wearing kingly regalia, executing foreign prisoners, ruling independently as king. I tried to look for those pictures, but this is all I could find. Similarly, Tawosret took the throne following the death of her husband, etc. And then, of course, you have the Cleopatra, last of the great female pharaohs. So it was not exactly an exception. There were several female pharaohs, something which came to light during this research for me. Um, Otherwise, if we go down just a little bit, the next step, the wealthy in general, their status, their privileges, etc., were a direct result of their relationship with the king and their own abilities to administer the country. Even though most of the officials were men, but women did get high office. And these are just some examples. 2 women even achieved the rank of a vizier, the prime minister, which was highly unusual, highest administrative title below the pharaoh. Now this one, I know it's hard to read, but basically this is about leisure, ladies of leisure, which is wealthy women who had the money, and therefore I would like you to notice this. Rich women were not required to produce large numbers of children as labor source, because that was one of the criteria. You have a large family, you have a lot of children, and therefore you would have people who can work for you, family members who can work for you, but that's not a requirement for queens and royalty. They could instead have alternate career choices. So these are just some examples of what they could do. This, by the way, is of course the Hollywood version of it. It's not really a authentic picture, but it gives the idea that they could have a good life, basically. And they were pampered, enjoy all manner of relaxation, listen to music, eating good food, etc., etc. Okay. So this was about a very quick overview of what the wealthy women and the queens had and had access to. But we talk about the ordinary poor, is not exactly poor as much as ordinary Egyptian women, the common folk. The woman's role as mother and wife still come first in Egyptian society, which again Christina will talk about that in detail. But besides that, there were some other professions such as weaving, perfume making, entertainment. They were musicians, and they had a lot of rights. The political, economic rights Egyptian women enjoyed made them extremely liberated. These were some examples of work: farm work, weaving, bartering, although the primary work was still to look after home and children. One of the problems, of course, was there was no contraception, which means when they became pregnant, then a whole lot of time and energy and everything would be concentrated on child care, and that would take time away from any possible potential work they could engage in. They also had religious employment. In general, men were in charge of temples, etc., but women filled a variety of religious offices. Instead of increase in the number of elite women associated with temples as musicians of a particular deity. So musicians was a very sort of a significant career option, you could say, for women at that time. Associated with cults of female deities, in general, goddesses tended to serve as protectors of the dead. Okay. And finally, I think I'm getting close to, yeah. Equity, I cannot sort of stress on this enough. It's so surprising the degree of equity that women enjoyed in ancient Egypt. They were portrayed in a very public way alongside men. They were shown to coordinate ritual events, even undertake manual work. This is interesting. I came across this. One woman steering a cargo ship even reprimands the man who brings her a meal with the words, "Don't obstruct my face while I'm putting to shore." So they had a commanding or a powerful position, and it didn't matter. They could be as the overseer position rather than just the underlings. Surviving accounts, contracts show women receiving the same pay rations as men for undertaking the same job, which is something that we still have not achieved. That was just amazing to me. They control treasury, owned estates, workshops, etc. So, in conclusion, strange makes a very traditional but surprisingly modern, and I would like to underline modern, certainly, in so many different ways. Limited by gender, but they are highly respected, most remarkable with the legal rights and responsibilities that Western women will not achieve for the next 4,000 years or more. Thank you. Any questions? Thanks.
Shall we keep the questions at the end?
Yeah, let's do that. Sure, sure. Let's get that out.
All right. Now, I'm going to talk about the role of the women in marriage as wives and mothers. So from Kanika's presentation, we can learn that 4,000 years ago, if we look at that women today, and if we think of them, we will imagine them as oppressed, depressed, and very kind of neglected, devalued women. But from her presentation and from all the research that I did, I learned that no, in reality, all these ancient women had more rights as compared to what we have today, even in the third world countries. Many women in the third world countries don't enjoy the rights what the women then had today. So, Egypt treated its women with respect in the ancient times than any other major civilization of that time. So women were treated with respect because marriage was a normal and a very desirable state at that time. Both genders, they valued each other's company and they wanted to spend time together. And it is interesting to note that there are no records of any actual marriage found in the history, So some scholars believe that maybe it's a real fluke in the history records that we don't find any actual marriage records there. But then some other scholars, they believe that when couple, they started to live together, so they were considered a married couple, which is like a very modern North American concept of common law marriage. So it's very true that even then but there were no records of marriage, but definitely they did have records of divorce, so which means that divorce only follows marriage. So there was marriage, that's why there were records of divorce there. So as they were very kind of highly sensual people, they believed more in fertility and procreation. That's why they consider that if they want to get into the marital relationship, they ought to have plenty of children there, And for normal or kind of ordinary people, large families were the big idea. But for the royal families, they kind of stick to the smaller number of families because they could afford the servants and they could afford many other people there. Once marriage was there, it was the couple was expected to be faithful sexually to each other, except the kings or the royal families, monogamy was the norm. Monogamy was the norm. They will marry one spouse and they will express their love, they will express their affection, and it was a purely social and economic arrangement. Extended family concept was also there. Like the mothers, the daughters, the grandmothers, aunts, they all live together in one household. If not in the one household, then they will live in a very close proximity with each other so that they can help out each other with the household task and other things. So there are some records, that they said that when men were unable to have children with their wives, when their wives were unable to conceive, they could have children with their servant girls there also. So they were so much into the procreation and the families that they wanted more and more families and more children right there. There was no age limit. People could marry. I mean, there was no set rule that only you have to get married at this age, but certainly there was definitely a rule for the girls to. The girls were supposed to get into this marital relation only after they start to menstruate, which is about the age of 14 and 15. So when their menarche hits or when they are about the hormones start to kick in, then yeah, certainly they can have the marital status there. So the family would throw big parties, the family and the friends, so that they can celebrate the marriage of their children and friends. And couple were presented with a lot of gifts so that they can have their fresh start in the new household. Egyptian marriages were different as compared to the marriages that we have today. They were allowed, they could marry in their own relationships, like their first cousins, their brothers and sisters, especially in the royal family, to safeguard their dynasties. They didn't want their royal blood to become any mixed, so they wanted that, especially, and there are some, while I was reading the articles and doing the research, I found that there were times when fathers also married their daughters in order to save their dynasties there. So women were treated as equal in the marriage as their husbands, they have an equal say, and couples were shown how we see their love and emotional support. We often see in the images having their arms around each other, and couples are embracing each other, so that shows their love and emotional support, and they are treated very equally. Even in this picture, we see that husband and wife, they both are holding their children. It means that it's not only the job of a woman to raise the family and children. Men took equal sharing in their raising families there. Monogamy was the norm, which I said earlier, yes, and with the marriage comes their legal rights and their economic rights. Women acquired the possession, what they got from as gifts from their family, from their parents, and from their husbands there, or family and friends. According to this Egyptian property law, women was entitled to own 1/3 of the property, which was the community property of her husband, even during their marriage or even after the divorce or even after the death of her husband there. The dowry means the property that she brings in from her family, the inheritance that she gets from her parents there. So that was hers. So that is hers, but husbands, they are entitled to use them for free. But in case of divorce, she will take all her inheritance back plus the share which she gets in the property that she gets from the community property that she gets from her husband there. As Kaninika told, that yes, childbearing was the main, and they had so many goddesses of pregnancy, goddesses of children there, So it was a very important phenomenon for them, A fertile woman was considered like a very successful. She didn't only earn the recognition of her husband, she also earned the respect of her society by becoming a mother. So no matter how many roles they have, no matter what kind of careers they had, once they are a mother, once they are mom, then they are put above anybody else there, So these are the important roles, the mothers, the sisters, and the daughters, So these are considered like the three very important roles at that time. So the birth of the child was certainly a great time. It was a time of great joy, but of a little concern also. The two concerns which were very common was the high infant mortality rate, and secondly, the stress that the mother could go through during the time of delivery, okay? So there were two midwives assigned to that kind of job when the mother was supposed to deliver the babies. One to take care of the newborn, and other to take care of the woman who is delivering the child at that time. They had many titles. They had many titles, but the mistress of the house was the title commonly given to the non-royal women. Mistress of the house means that she is running the household. Men were supposed to be the head of the household, but women were not less. So there is a great saying in that My Great Big Greek Wedding, the movie, that if men are the head of the household, women are the neck, So they are the ones who make them turn right or left, So this is true. Yeah, women were neck at that time, and they ran the household, and men were not expected to interfere. They avoided interfering in the household matters and trusted their wives to do the job properly. Running the smooth household was not an easy job. It required a lot of work. Even food had to be prepared from the scratch. And commonly eaten food was the bread, vegetables served with beer. So that was the kind of common food that they had. And everything had to be started from the scratch. Even if you wanted a loaf of bread, the women had to grind the grains to prepare that bread, So it was not easy, but certainly Egyptian women who were the head of the household, those who could afford, they would hire the servants and slaves to help them around the household. But it was still the job of the mistress of the house to see and supervise that if all the work is done properly in the presence of the servants there. We learned a lot about the royal women. We talked about the wealthy women. We talked about the poor. So women, no matter whether they belong to the royal families, they belong to the wealthy families or poor families, they had equal rights. They enjoyed a lot of rights then that we may not have even today. Okay? What were their rights? They had the same legal and economic rights as any Egyptian men could have. They kept their inheritance from the parents that they got, okay? Like there was no legal distinction whether it's a male or a female. The only legal distinction was based upon their social classes, if they belong to the upper class or if they belong to the lower class. That was the only, but there was no distinction between the genders. Both men and women, they were treated pretty equal. When it comes to the property that the woman brought into the marriage from her parents or which she inherited from her family, that was hers, no matter what they do. She could manage and dispose of her private property. She could administer all her property independently. She didn't have to ask her husband what she wants to do with the property. She was her own master when it comes to her stuff, her property, and her belongings. And she had full right to own and run her own business. And of course, the family, the friends, and the husband and parents, they all helped that lady to run her own business. So the social support, the family support was always there when it came to the running their own businesses and sharing their property right there. We heard about the royal ladies that till the time their sons or nephews, they grow old, the women were in control and they ruled the nation. And that was one of the rights that the women, they enjoyed at that time. They were also able to appear in the court. They can bring lawsuit against anybody in the court, and they will not be discriminated based upon their gender or based upon their the sex that they were. So they can appear in the court, and they will win the cases what they brought to the courts right there. They were able to make a will, whatever the property they brought, if they want to leave it for their family, if they want to leave it for their children, sons or daughters, whatever. I mean, procreation was the main idea according to their religion and their values, but in case the woman is unable to conceive, they were open to adoption. They were able to adopt, but only with the consent of their husbands. And they won't go for they will go for the adoption within their family. They will go and adopt children from their poor family so that they can keep the family inside. They won't go for much of the outside adoption that today we can do. We can go for international adoption. We can go for adoption anywhere. But they prefer to adopt children from their own families, like less fortunate families right there. They were allowed to go out in public. Today we see a lot of Egyptian women wearing veils and a lot of people from the third world countries wearing veils. but they worked in the fields, they worked out in the offices, they worked everywhere in the public, but they did not wear veil at that time. So it means that they felt they had the sense of safety, they had the sense of security. That's why they didn't have to cover themselves or hide themselves from anybody else there, okay? So work of the upper and middle class family was limited to the home and to their family, but their customary roles were the mothers and the daughters and bearer of the children, but some did more than that. They also held offices, and they participated in the real jobs good there. Though, all these Egyptians, their main focus was on the institution of marriage, but divorce was not uncommon either. It was, of course, a matter of disappointment, but no way it was a disgrace. It was accepted. And there were two reasons how people could go. There was a fault-based reason and there was a no fault-based reason. The fault-based reason was when the person, either gender, was unfaithful to the person, they were unable to conceive, or there was abuse in the family. So those were the fault-based reasons that why you would divorce. The no fault was incompatibility. I cannot get along, and they were granted the wish, and they could go for the divorce. But it was never a stigma. It was a matter of disappointment, but never brought any disgrace. And we see the records show that many people, they remarried after the divorce. That's why we see one person having more than one spouse, because remarriage was common. They can divorce. And also because of the high death rate at that time, high mortality rates, people will go for the second marriage, because marriage was like the most desired institution, and they did want to get married all the time. So that's why remarriage, and high death rate was able to keep that. But certainly, women were also able to initiate the divorce. It's not only the men who would initiate the divorce. But if women will initiate the divorce, she will. And if the divorce is like uncontested, if the man is kind of willing to into the divorce also, she will not only take her share, but she will also take the property which comes from her husband, which is 1/3 of the community property. Plus, she will take all the settlements which come with the divorce. But if she dumps her sick husband and wants a divorce just to get rid of the sick husband, then she has to let go of everything that she brought. So she had a right to divorce, but in a genuine case, not in just because I want to go away, I can't take care of you, sick man. So no, she can't do that. Then she had to let go of everything which was there, right? So yeah, women had the right to initiate divorce at that time. So the royal wives, yeah, it was their role to help bore the children, but maybe not that many. They bore many children so that the system can run smoothly. They ensured the smooth functioning of the palace. They were not actively involved in the official businesses, but silently in the background, they were very actively involved with their husbands, helping them. And they also played a role of a regent, like till the time their children, the sons grow up, they will rule so that, yeah, they can wait till then. So we learned about the royal kingdom, that how the queens, they became more powerful, they acquired many titles. And Hatshepsut, she became pharaoh after gaining all. Did I say it right, Rafi? Yeah. Okay, so she became pharaoh after she gained the role there. So certainly, no matter whatever women did, they always found honor as mothers, and that is the role of any woman, not only the Egyptian women, not only the Asian women, not only the American women, no matter wherever the women are, they find the great pleasure in their motherly role. So many people say that yes, Egyptian times were the best time for women to live. And it seems like that, at least for women, where they were treated equally and they were given the basic rights. And today, in today's society, there are many countries, there are many societies where women's rights are lacking, and women who, like as you said, they are the role models right there, and they are the building blocks of our societies, the families. They are the neck of the family, if not the head, definitely the neck of the family. And if they don't get any respect, then certainly they need to do more. So I will leave the motherly role and the family role for my colleagues to discuss. But certainly I will talk a little bit about the women, not talk but share that these were the ancient clothing that many women they prefer to wear. There was a distinction between the upper class and the lower class clothing. The royal or the rich women, they always had better clothing as compared to the women who came from the not so fortunate families there. Anytime, women, they are so much into the beauty and they had these beauty treatments there and then the beauty secrets, their hairstyle and all that, One profession that I think Kaninika slipped off, that is the women were professional mourners. They will always mourn. They were called to mourn at the death of the men, not at the death of the women, but they were called to mourn professionally. They were special mourners there, okay? So these are the ancient royal people. They can get their hair cut right there. And these are the jewelry, the weakness of a woman. All right. Thank you so much. Mhm.
Nikki Meadows and I are going to talk a little bit about the family life. And I want to draw two contrasts. One is how ancient Egyptian family life is similar to our contemporary family life, and then to talk about how it is actually different. Just in case you don't know where Egypt is, I want to make sure that you realize it's in North Africa. And we're indebted to the hieroglyphics and the drawings because that's how we know about Egypt. We don't know this much about so many other cultures, but they were kind to us and they shared with us their representation of their royal life. We unfortunately don't know all that much about the common people because what's depicted and what we go to see are the monuments to the deities and to the royal people who ruled at different times in history. Okay, I've been to Egypt twice. There's that. It is the coolest place in the world. I'm sorry. It is just wonderful. So actually, these are just pictures. The camels are out of this world. But this is a young Egyptian-American young man who also went back to his homeland. If you ever have a chance to go to Egypt, you must do so because it is just a phenomenal experience. So don't overlook that part. Put it in on your bucket list, on your to-do list. So children are instructed to repay your mother for all her care. Give her as much bread as she needs and carry her as she carried you, for you are a heavy burden to her. And when you were finally born, at the end of that, she still carried you on her neck, and for 3 years she suckled you and kept you clean. So the original guilt trip. Here it is, right here. Be good to your mother because she has worked so very hard. So childbirth was seen as important, as has been established. So that's one thing that we can know about early Egyptian life. There's a book by Brazelton and Greenspan called The Irreducible Needs of Children. And I love that terminology. So what are the irreducible needs of children, whether they're in ancient Egypt or whether they're in Charleston, Illinois? And this is a selected list of what Brazelton and Greenspan identified. So love, safety, and a village membership. So love, ongoing, nurturing relationships. How can we see that that was exhibited in ancient Egypt? They cared for their children. And it was either their job or it was their job to manage the people who cared for their children. And that, of course, depended on their socioeconomic status. They also named their children early. They didn't wait to name them. Through the naming process and amulets and other things that fit in with their religious practices, they sought to protect their children. And protection in the environment was important. Is that horrible? Do you see what that slide is? See the scorpion? Yeah. That's the point. So they lived out in a desert area, or at least the Nile Valley bordered a desert area. So it could be, especially before the rains came to flood the Nile and to create all the growth season, it was an austere environment. So the heat, the wind. Of course, that has done us a favor because things are so well preserved in Egypt because of the heat and because of the dry, very, very dry climate. So while a lot of the things that they did was to preserve the beauty and the youthfulness, there were also some of these practices using chemistry and concoctions that actually protected their skin. So families protected their children. The village membership was important. Of course, many of us grew up with the story of Moses, who was drawn from the water and actually adopted by an Egyptian princess. Well, adoption was not that uncommon, and that really amazed me because I had thought that the adoption of Moses must have been a really, really, really strange occurrence. You know, another child from a race of people who were at that point slaves, but actually that was not the case apparently. And so as Christina pointed out, they utilized adoption to care for children who had been abandoned and whose families were very impoverished. As a matter of fact, the Greeks actually noted in their writings that they were surprised that the Egyptians treated babies, infants, so well because apparently the Greeks were throwing out their babies to the elements when they didn't want them anymore. Female children were socialized and educated to be mistresses of household, also entertainment skills, to be the people who carried out the actual work to enable other people to utilize the cosmetics and the hair and the clothing standards that was necessary. So that took a lot of skilled labor in order to support these wealthy families. To be a domestic servant and then to be a wife, mother, according to the skills. So that's how female children were educated in terms of developing skills. Male children in their village membership could possibly go to school. And if they learned to read, or if they learned to write, and if they learned mathematics, then they could be a scribe or a bureaucrat and do the accounting and the managerial work of the kingdom. The military was also an option, and it took many, many tradesmen, artisans, farmers, and herdsmen. So if their family was in those professions, then they would be continuing. So the class distinctions. Transportation required people to do the transportation, so whether it was boat travel on the Nile or carrying people through the city who were very wealthy or royalty, so that was part of the job of the people of the lower class. All of the beauty regimens were things that the lower class people held the upper class, as well as household and food preparation. But the good thing was that the peasants and farmers did have property rights, and they could even inherit the properties of their masters if those masters died childless. The common people's materials and artifacts is rarely surviving. So here's a terracotta model of what a common person's household would be like. The small garden, the small house, the importance of the rooftop for cooling, reed sandals, whereas the royalty would wear leather sandals, and of course baskets. So Egyptian technology is astounding, and our technology, see this little light bulb, it doesn't seem to fit very well. So when I was in Egypt, I didn't take this picture, but when I saw this picture, I remembered very well the feeling of going down this tunnel, this place with stairs, and knowing that that rock had been there for thousands and thousands of years. And there was these little light bulbs on these little thin strings, and you're in this completely dark, openless place. There's only one way out, and that's all those people behind you. And there's that little light bulb, and I thought, how incongruent. So our technology doesn't exactly fit with ours, and we can't reproduce their technology very well. And Dr. Meadows is going to pick it up there.
So now I'm going to actually do the comparison with ancient technologies and our technologies now. So when we think about ancient Egypt, we think about their limitations often. So limitations by their deities, they were limited in the way they could behave by their patterns of worship. We might think that they were limited in their communication patterns and some of those types of things. But actually what I want to look at is the way they had more freedom sometimes than we did, and how we are limited as well and don't even realize it often. So in order to really compare and contrast today's children and families with ancient Egypt's children and families, we'd have to pull the plug on what we would call our technology. Technology is anything that makes the world easier, obviously, but our technology is largely electronic. We would have to get rid of things powered by petroleum products. We would have to completely rethink the way we interact, the way we communicate with one another. So I want to talk about that for a minute. We are in our mind, we are servants almost to the technology that we have, just like people in ancient Egypt might have, seemed to be servants. So the technology that we have shapes our lives, shapes our family. The technology that we have shapes the way we interact with one another. Think about the way those of you that are here interacted with your families when you were children, and the way families interact now. And whether that's a positive or a negative, is open for debate. On the one hand, my children don't live with me anymore, and I talk to them a lot. I talk to them at least, I have two, and I talk to one of them at least once a day. Now, it's through texting. It's not face-to-face, but I think if they lived across, they still live here in town, I think if they lived across town and we didn't text, I don't know that I would talk to them every day. I don't know what that would be. So the idea that our technology is taking over us is true, but there are some positive aspects. We always have to look at technology with a real fluid eye, I suppose. But it does change the way families communicate, right? For better or for worse, we communicate very, very differently than we have in the past, based on the technology that we have. The media that we have shapes families. It tells families what to value. Instead of looking to a smaller community, looking towards deities, looking towards nobility, we look towards the media to tell us what's important, what we need, what we should have. The media shapes our value system to a great degree. The media shapes our entertainment, clearly. It's just overwhelming. See how overwhelmed the children are by the technology. It's really something to think about. So I want to leave you guys with some recommendations, because that's what we do in the School of Family and Consumer Sciences. So we've covered ancient Egypt. I'm going to lead then into how we believe we might be able to get back the feel of some of that ancient closeness and some of the ancient ties, and a village that is more connected maybe by relationships and less connected by technology. So these are some recommendations that we have in the School of Family and Consumer Sciences. We use from the American Association of Pediatrics, National Association for the Education of Young Children, all provide information for us. But what we need to do is we need to look at the media and the technology the children are using. We tend to look at some things as being very useful to children and families, and some things as being negative. So for instance, I'll have people that will come in. I work in the child development lab, as Dr. Painter said. I have families that will come in and say, my child will sit in front of a computer for hours. So we're talking under 5. And they're excited about that. They think that that's a really good thing, because computers are good, because people need to know how to use computers. And so what we say is that's pretty close to sitting in front of a television for hours. The computers, the games that children use, the things that they're doing, when you add up all of their screen time, so you have to consider computers, you have to consider televisions, iPods, whatever it is that they're doing, you have to count all of that when you're talking about screen time. When you're talking about younger children, the use of the computer is pretty close to the use of any other, entertainment media. So thinking about all of that. Looking at the purpose of our technology, we recommend that you use technology to do things you can't do other ways. So for instance, I'm always amazed by edutainment, they call it. So that's education through entertainment, which, fine, whatever. I try to do that myself. I try to be somewhat entertaining. I have videos, things like that. But the education that young children need is not found on a screen. So I always tell the story about the Learning to Dress Yourself program for preschool children that is a computer program. And so it's a stick person standing here like this, and then there are clothes, and you drag the clothes, to where they go. So you drag the hat to the head, and it'll stay there. If you drag it to the tummy, it goes back where it came from, so that it helps children know where clothes go. Which, really? And these are the same people that will dress a child, complain if a child undresses itself, and then put them in front of a computer screen to learn where clothes go. So, really, don't do things like that. That's just silly. We need to let children do what they can do. Use technology to do things that you can't do. So, for instance, I don't have a lion in my house or access to a lion. If I want children to hear what a lion sounds like or see a lion, that's a really good way to go to technology and look it up and show them videos, photos, audio of a lion. Not to learn to dress yourself, not to learn the coloring books, things like that. Those are all just silly. Don't do that. It's very comparable to passive viewing. A lot of the games that they have that they say are educational are very comparable to passive viewing. And then rote learning is just not productive. I always tell the story of my little son that came to visit my class years ago when I taught child development. And I said, Lee, do you know the days of the week? And he said, yes, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I said, you do know your days of the week. Today's Wednesday. What day is tomorrow? And he looked at me and he said, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I said, so basically, I'm not real. I mean, he's cute. Of course, he was the cutest child in the world. I was very proud of him. But he didn't know his days of the week, right? He knew the words to the days of the week, which is called rote learning. And that's not productive. That's not impressive. I'm not impressed when children know their ABCs, particularly. They'll learn that. I'm impressed if they know heavy and light, and they know that you can't put something really heavy on top of something really light without squishing it. I think it's good when they know that you don't bite somebody when they have something you want. Those are the kind of skills that I'm impressed with, as opposed to just memorization, and that's what computers do for us, basically. To avoid unattended use, this is just a huge thing. Just put the computers in a central location of the house so that children are not off by themselves using them. And then, if you're always going to be around, they're very likely not to be doing things that they shouldn't do with computers. So I say, if you do nothing at all that I tell you to do, don't allow children to have technology in their bedrooms. That's just the number one thing that you should. And let's see. Oh, I've already said this. Use only to represent what can't be represented. So I've already said that. I jumped ahead. But like I said, we need to use our technology to enhance what we have, not to replace what we could do in relationships. So this is our little FYI informational piece. And this is our closing picture, right? These are just beautiful photographs that Frances has chosen for you. Yes. One more photograph? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. These are Frances's children that she likes to... What you can tell them.
So the contrast between the current contemporary Egypt and in the background, the historic. Now it's in the hands of the children.
Thank you.
I can use this.
Here's this one.
Okay. I can use this one. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions from the audience? I have just a hypothetical question. What do you think is the difference in the mental processes of a child who is today having his magic thing and very busy, and mommy asks him to do something and say, Mommy, I'm very busy. I'm all absorbed here. Mm-hmm. What goes in his mind or her mind as a child in comparison to a child in ancient Egypt who has got this prism of rare rock that has many colors, and he's trying, or she is so absorbed in it. So my comparison, he's absorbment or something, to being absorbed. And the guy in ancient Egypt 5,000 years ago would tell, Mommy, I'm so busy now. Leave me alone. Same thing here after 5,000 years. What do you think a difference or no difference in the processes, in the mind processes? Here's a
Short
mic
attention
for
span.
any of you.
You go ahead.
You're right. It's very true. Children are it's hard to pull children away once they get involved in technology. We all know that. But it's hard to pull children away from anything they enjoy doing. And so the difference would be that it's an external motivation when they're dealing with technology. When somebody is doing something for them and they're responding to something, then it's external. Whereas if they have to manipulate the items, whatever that might be, building something with rocks, water, and, wet, dry, things like that, when they're manipulating it, then they're forming the processes and thinking from one item to the next. Things like cause and effect, the issues like that they can really think through. So it's more of an external motivation instead of an internal motivation when you are dealing with modern technology. What we see and what the research shows us repeatedly is the short attention span. And we're seeing that, I think, at the university level. It's beginning to come up to the university level. So short attention span, inability to problem solve, wanting people to do things for them. What do I have to do to make this happen, as opposed to let's figure out what you have to do to make things happen. So it's more the external. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's excellent.
Okay. Now, is it a myth that people in this generation or children of this generation can multitask, quote unquote, and do 4 or 5 things at a time perfectly, quote unquote, or it is a myth?
It is actually a myth because I just saw some recent research. I can't remember the researcher's name. But what they found was people are able to multitask, but their productivity in each of the things that they're doing actually goes down. So the quality does go down. Even though they are able to do it, the quality actually goes down. So that, I thought, was a very important experiment to be able to do. And people have always multitasked. We saw the photograph of the woman that was feeding a baby and picking a fig. I mean, that's multitasking. So we've always done that. It's just that we multitask externally and so overwhelmingly with the jangles and the different parts of our brain are used with the external motivation.
I think this is very important, if you agree with me, that we have to define what multitasking is, because I can click on my printer to print 1,000 pages and push on my microwave in a second to cook my meal for a half an hour, and then turn the lights and do this. I might multitask things that are multitaskable.
Right,
But
right.
to listen to you, I have to give you my full attention.
Right, and not be
I can't
texting.
listen to you while texting or doing this or
Right,
that.
exactly,
And the
exactly.
funny thing is that these kids who are multitasking and if they have a problem, they are hurting, and they come to you, and you say, "Okay, I'm listening. Talk. Says, please, give me your attention."
Right, right.
Look at me.
Right, attention span
So,
is the big,
it's not
that's what
just
the
attention
research
span,
shows.
But they want you to look in the eye. Don't do anything else while I'm complaining or while I'm hurting, because I can't accept multitasking in this.
True.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? Very interesting topic. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
indeed.
much. Thank you.